What's up, booktube? It's Leah Cooper, and today I'm bringing you my February reading wrap-up. February was a really great month. I averaged reading about 100 pages per day. I finished 8 books, though I also had 3 other books in progress at the end of the month that arguably 2 of them I might have been able to finish if I'd pushed a little harder, but I didn't because I felt like 8 books was a good month as it was. And then that meant I read approximately 2,887 pages this month. So yeah, really good overall. My average pages per book is 338 so far this year. Now we have a slightly larger data set. I think that's still a little bit high because I did read 2 YA novels, which were both long and also very quick reads this month, so that kind of helped bump up those kinds of stats in general. It's been a while since I read some YA, and reading it this month I remembered, oh yeah, this is really fast reading, which was nice. Yeah, so let's dive into what I read. I'm just kind of sorry if I'm looking like off the camera here. I've got my spreadsheet up on my laptop. I got this new chair. Maybe I can roll this over and put my laptop on it. That way I don't have to be like leaning off camera screen. There we go. That's a little bit better. I'm still looking over here, but the first thing I finished in February was a mystery that is Borrower of the Night by Elizabeth Peters. This is the first actual book in the Vicky Bliss series. Technically, there's a book over here. It's behind the stack of books. That is like the prequel to the series. Though I still, even after reading this, I still don't know how the Camelot Caper is a prequel, because as far as I could remember, there are no crossover characters. So maybe the Camelot Caper had characters from later in the Vicky Bliss series. I don't know. I read this. I gave it 3 stars. Didn't like it as much as the Camelot Caper. I liked Vicky, however, she did suffer from a lot of not like other girls things, which she's coming from a really interesting place because she's got a lot of difficulties with women. Like the way Elizabeth Peters writes women, there's a lot of like combativeness and competition between them. Also, so Vicky is a historian and she's a professor at a university, and she's got this really awful misogynist coworker who has decided that he wants her to marry him and he's in love with her, and she needs to be dominated by a greater intellectual mind, and he's constantly sexually harassing her. And they both read this article that gives them this clue about what happened to this sculpture from this famous like Middle Ages artist in Germany. And so in the summer, both of them, well, they make this competition with some like art thieves between themselves and some art thieves, and they're like, they all kind of show up in Germany over the summer looking for this lost piece of sculptural art in this rundown kind of ducal castle, which has been renovated into a hotel, and there is a murder mystery involved. And so I liked parts of it, but there were just parts of it that have not aged well. This is obviously from the early 70s. I think it's from 1973. 1973. So it's like, it's got some issues. Didn't love it as much as some of the other Elizabeth Peters I've read, but I will keep reading the Vicky Bliss books because, she totally gave her misogynist colleague the boot at the end, so I was really happy about that. And so I'm hoping he just doesn't show up in the other ones, because I think excluding him would make the books just like, that alone would increase the star rating by half a star. Then the next thing I finished was an audiobook that was Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This has also ended up on the booktube SFF awards for fantasy, but I was reading it before the shortlist came out, mostly because it's available now in my library, and it had been on my radar as something I wanted to read. I gave this 3.5 stars, I guess. Yeah, I think 3.5 is still pretty accurate for how I feel about it. I really loved the beginning. I thought it was very engaging. I really loved the protagonist Cassiopeia, and this is one of those stories where there are point of views given to the villains, and usually I am I really don't like those. But I actually felt in this book, the villain POVs were pretty interesting. Not because they made me sympathetic to the villains, but just like, they weren't like mustache twirling. They were more just like, one of them was just her cousin, who is a misogynistic, and his worldview is trash because he's trash. And you just dislike him. And then the other one is the god who, because it's a story about a girl who is, she and her mother are kind of outcasts in this rich family because her mother ran away with like an indigenous man, and then he died, and then she had to move back with her daughter, and her daughter is much more like brown. This is 1920s Mexico. And the father is very mad that his daughter ran away with like a penniless guy, indigenous guy, right? And so they treat Cassiopeia kind of like a servant, not kind of, completely like a servant. And she has dreams of getting out, and she opens this box in her grandfather's room and wakes up a death god. And it's the oldest of the death gods, who was imprisoned by his second brother, who is now sitting on the Jade throne in the underworld. And so we also get that brother's, not the brother she woke up, but the brother who sitting on the throne, Uhunkame and Wuhukame. So we get Wuhukame's point of view. And I thought his point of view was also quite interesting. So it was one of those cases where actually villain point of views I thought were fine. Though it does tie into something I did have a problem with. The one character whose POV we did not get in this book, like we got a bunch of different little POVs, the one POV we didn't get was Hukame's. Hukame is the god. She wakes up and she goes on this adventure because they're tied together because she woke him up. And now she has to help him regain all his body parts, regain his power, and regain his throne, otherwise she'll die. And we don't get his POV, and he's the romantic interest in the book. And like, of all the people not to give us a POV, the author chose not to give us the point of view of the romantic interest. And so I could not get behind the romance at all. Like, I just couldn't. If it had just been Cassiopeia's POV in the book, maybe, but like the whole point of Ukame's character is that he's becoming more human over the course of the story because he's literally being influenced by Cassiopeia's blood. But we only get that from like a third person, really removed perspective. And so it didn't work for me. So I just was really puzzled why we never got his point of view. Like, of all the characters not to give us a point of view, we didn't get his. Like, we got her grandfather's point of view a couple of times in the first half of the book. Anyway, I found that really confusing. Also, I will say the middle drags. It feels like there's a lot of time spent doing nothing, which I guess if you were invested in the romance, maybe those parts wouldn't drag, but to me they just dragged because it was a lot of like romance stuff that was not landing for me as a reader. I legit, like, halfway through this book, I was like, oh my god, this book needs to be 100 pages shorter. And then I checked and I realized it was only a 330 page book, but it felt like a 450 page book. So take that for what it is. That's why it's only a 3.5 star. I wasn't a huge fan of the ending. It really leans heavily on the death of the maiden trope, in that it's literally the epitome of set yourself on fire to keep him warm. Like, it is that trope, and I'm not here for that trope. So it was I'm not gonna say I'll never read Sylvia Moreno Garcia again, because I think her writing was really nice, and I would definitely be interested in reading other things from her if the plots sound interesting. So there you go. The next thing I read in February, and actually I finished this before Gods of Jade and Shadow, but whatever, was Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. And this is YA fantasy. And oh man, I was so disappointed in this book. Okay, so I remember when this book sold to whoever published it, I can't remember, and I thought it sounded so good. It was pitched as Mulan meets Project Runway. Okay, I'm here for it. And I've had it on, like, wanting to read it on my Goodreads for literally 2 or 3 years. It came out this past summer, so I got a copy, the ebook copy, in February, and the first half of it is so good. It was like a 4.5, 5-star read for the first half. I loved it. Like, the parts that are Mulan meet Project Runway are so good. about halfway through, the plot completely changes. The Project Runway and even like the Mulan aspects are completely gone. It becomes this, it became basically Shadow and Bone, that plot. Or maybe actually more like Siege and Storm's plot, the second book's plot. And like trying to find three mythical objects of power. And it was about as well written as those books, which, I mean, maybe I should say this. I love Six of Crows, Crooked Kingdom, but I do not like the original Grisha trilogy book. I think it's really poorly written, and I don't understand how those two pieces of work are written by the same person. It puzzles me. But yeah, and also, like, the romance started off kind of fun and antagonistic, and then suddenly becomes ushy gushy, I'll die for you, and it's a real fast switch. I was so disappointed. The ending's horrible. I finished the end of this book, and I was like, wait a second, doesn't that contradict the beginning? Because there's a prologue piece, which obviously happens chronologically at the end of the book, and then we launch into the story, right? It's one of those, which I know a lot of people kind of roll their eyes at that setup, but I don't have a problem with it. I love that kind of stuff, that kind of heavy-handed foreshadowing, intrigue, whatever. I'm a big fan of it. But so I was like, wait a second, doesn't this ending literally contradict that prologue? So I had to go back and reread the prologue just to make sure it wasn't explicitly contradictory. It wasn't explicitly contradictory, but it still felt disconnected. It didn't feel like they actually tied in neatly together. I don't know. And the problem with this series is, I think it's a series, and I suspect that the second book is going to continue the plot that arises at the end of Act 2 and in Act 3, which is not a plot I liked or thought was well developed or even well written. I don't know. I think this book has a good chance of winding up, if I remember it by the end of the year, of winding up on my most disappointing reads of the year. I think I gave it a 2-star. I gave it a 3-star. Lol, I have to change that rating. It's not a 3-star. It's a 2-star. It gets a 2-star because the first half is really good. But man, I'm sad. Okay, moving on. That was the most disappointing thing I read this month. So the next thing I read in February was another YA fantasy. And this one really surprised me, and that was The Gilded Walls by Roshani Chakshi. So again, I was reading this before the BookTube SFF Awards shortlist came out, and then it wound up on the shortlist for the YA category, which I was kind of surprised about. I picked it up because it was literally just available now at my library under the new releases for YA. And I went over there to just look and see if there was any YA that looked interesting. I know a lot of people, this was really hyped last year, but I thought I remember hearing a bunch of people talk about how they didn't like it. So I was kind of surprised to see it nominated, but whatever. I gave it a 4-star. For the most part, I liked it. There was one piece at the end with Severin. Severin, isn't that his name? I always forget if it's Severin or Severus. It can't be Severus. That's a totally Harry Potter name. There was one piece, yeah, Severin. There was one piece at the end that I did not like, but otherwise I thought this was perfectly fine. I talked about this a lot in my BookTube SFF Awards TBR. I think this is 100% kind of a clone of Six of Crows / Crooked Kingdom, but I don't care because the characters were unique enough. The world building is completely unique on its own. It's set in is it 1880s Paris? I feel like it's 1880s Paris, 1890s Paris, and Art Deco Paris, right? And it's got this magic system where you can imbue stuff by gilding it, and that's attached to Babel stones, which are stones from the Tower of Babel that are protected by different houses all over the world. And there's all this political stuff between the houses of Paris because one of them is the fallen house and one of them has no heirs and is gone, but our protagonist Severin, he believes he was the heir of that house that is discontinued, and he wants to reclaim his house's austerity. And he owns a hotel, and he's got this little band of gilders and historians and dancer criminals, and it's a little bit like Leverage too in that way. And I thought it was fun. There was a couple of things that were a little bit but it's like YA. And also, I feel like for readers who like to read kind of similar things, you want you want a little bit like maybe unique worlds or unique characters, but you don't mind having kind of like similar plots, familiar tropes. I think this is, and you like Six of Crows, Crooked Kingdom, this is the perfect book for that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that kind of
editing, Leah, popping in real fast, just because when I started editing this, I realized that I was talking about some stuff that seems contradictory between what bugged me about Spin the Dawn and what I liked about the Gilded Walls. So in both of them, I mentioned how they're like plot wise very similar to other books, and in one case it bugged me and in one case it didn't, and that seems really hypocritical. But the key thing, and the thing I don't stress enough, is that in one case it's a similar plot but it's poorly written and the characters are really poorly developed, and in another case it is well written, and I think for the most part the characters are pretty well developed, and also the world is really well developed, and also the plot makes sense. So in the first example, Spin the Dawn, it has this really extreme plot turnaround in the middle of the book, and then the writing quality just really goes downhill. In the Gilded Wolves, it has a lot of similarities to another book, but the writing quality is very even throughout the book. The plot's very even throughout the book. Like, it makes sense from start to finish, and the characters are well developed from start to finish. So that's the key difference. Okay, back to the video.
that kind of book, or like wanting that kind of book. I certainly know that I kind of like to read stuff with similar tropes in it, and yeah, it's fine. So yeah, that was a surprisingly, it was an entertaining read, you know. Okay, moving on. The next thing I read was another library book. I read a lot of library books this year, and I'm going to be reading a lot of library books in March and April as well, and then I will be reading more off my shelves after awards season is over. So the next thing I read was another one I just grabbed because I went to the library, and I picked up a couple of things off the new releases shelves. So this is a 2019 release from Tor.com. It's basically a novella, and that is The Board Keeper by Kirsten Hall. And I didn't know anything about this. I just grabbed it because it was a Tor.com novella, and I like those. And it was also blurbed by Max Gladstone, so that was like a good indicator. This reminds me a lot of The Dream Quest of Velvet Bow, which is another Tor.com novella. The Dream Quest of Velvet Bow is based off Cthulhu, and it takes place in the dream world of Cthulhu. This has kind of a similar feel to it in that it takes place in the border between our kind of waking world and like all the realms of death, and they're like 999 kingdoms of death. And when you die in our world, you go into one of the 99 kingdoms. And so there's this person, this very powerful being called the Border Keeper, who lives at the border, and you can go and people have like gone to petition her to try to find, like, go into death to retrieve loved ones. And so this guy appears on her doorstep, Vaseth, and she thinks he's another one of those kind of like petitioners, and she's like, sure, I'll take you, but I'm gonna claim your soul before we're done. And he's like, that's fine, but he's actually tied up in like all this other stuff, and it's like way more complicated than just a guy trying to like save his lost love in death. And I really loved it. I loved the characters. I loved the glimpses of all the different like little death kingdoms that we got and how crazy they were. I think Kirsten Hall is she's writing another book in this universe. I don't know if it's a novella or a novel, but I do know it takes place in one of the kingdoms of death. And I think it might have one of the characters from this in it. And so I will definitely read that when it comes out, because I really like this. I gave this a 4-star. Yes. I gave this a 4-star. Highly recommend. This is one of those examples of a novella that definitely should have been nominated for like booktube SFF awards instead of some of the things that were. The next thing I finished in February was another smash hit, though I didn't rate it. So this is another one I picked up at the library. I was browsing new releases, and this is an editor I have come to. He's like an auto-buy editor now. He puts together hard sci-fi short story collections. I've got 2 reviews of his previous collections, Infinity's End and Infinity War. I'll try to link those up in the cards or down below in the description. So his collection for last year was Mission Critical, edited by Jonathan Strahan. I talked about this on Twitter if you've been following me. I love Jonathan Strahan's hard sci-fi collections. I can't shout about them enough. If you like hard sci-fi, you gotta pick them up. If you want to get into reading hard sci-fi, I think a short story collection could be a really good place, because then you're not like locked into an 600-page novel. And his are really good. He contracts really good authors, and he picks really good stories that work cohesively together. So Mission Critical, the theme for this one is what happens when shit hits the fan in space. And there was literally not a bad story in this. I gave this 5 stars. There's 15 stories. There was not a bad one in here. I mean, maybe a couple of them I would give 4 stars instead of 5 stars. But like as a whole, this collection was fantastic from start to finish. It has a lot of great authors in it. It has Elliot Tipodart. It has Yuna Lee. It has Christine Catherine Rush, Peter Watts, Linda Nagata. Like, just so many stories. I don't even know if I could pick out a certain story that's like my favorite. I think Devil in the Dust by Linda Nagata was really good. It takes place in like this far-flung universe where like I can't even talk about them. Like, all the stories are so unique. They have like so much different like tech and future constructions. We've got Earths or like human societies that kind of feel familiar to our human societies. There are human societies that are like radically different than ours. There are ones that are high tech. There are ones that are more like biotech. There are ones with AI. There are ones that are like afraid of AI. I mean, like, there's just so much good stuff in this. It's so good. Look at how pretty the cover is. Can I get it to focus? Try this out. Seriously. I'll move on. Another thing I read in February, well, I actually finished this in February. I read most of it in January, but I had to wait for it to come. This is the book. I had 45 minutes left of the audiobook, and my loan expired, and then I had to wait to get it back. But that was Penrick's Mission by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is the 4th book in the Penrick and Desdemona novella series, which is a prequel series set in the world of the 5 gods. So it's set a couple hundred years before the Curse of Chalian, and it follows a sorcerer named Penrick and his demon Desdemona. And I love this series. It's really good. I just love this universe Lois McMaster Bujold has created, the whole realm of the 5 gods. It's got to be like one of my current favorite fantasy worlds. And this was not the best one. I mean, I think I gave it 4 stars because it was good and it introduced some good characters. It's about Penrick. It takes place several years after Penrick and the Shaman. No, there's one after Penrick's Fox. It takes place several, like 5 to 10 years after Penrick's Fox. And Penrick's had a lot of upheavals in his life. Stuff's changed around politically. He's now been discharged on this mission to like recruit this general in another kind of fiefdom, and it's all a trap to like get that general out of power. And so like they try to kill Penrick, and then they try to blind the general, and Penrick's trying to keep the general and his half-sister alive, and they all have to flee, and lots of adventure. It's pretty good. I really like Nikes. She's the general's half-sister, and she and Penrick kind of have a little bit of a romance developing, and so it's pretty good. So I listened to that, and then the last thing I listened to in February was The Curse of Chalian, also by Lois McMaster Bujold. So I was listening to this for Tome Topple. It's slightly over 500 pages, and it's quite a nice chunky audiobook. And I did not finish it for Tome Topple. I finished it like 5 days after Tome Topple ended, so I didn't get anything read for Tome Topple, which is why I do not have a Tome Topple vlog, because Tome Topple did not go as planned. So I gave The Curse of Chalian 5 stars. I foresee it being on my top 5 or top 10 list for 2020. I loved this book so much. I can't even describe how much I loved it. I cried probably 5 or 6 times while listening to it. Like, I would just tear up. It is about a man named Castellar, the Castellar de something. Everyone calls him Kaz. Casriel de Castellar. So, it's about a man named Casriel de Castellar. And he is from, like, a noble house that no longer exists in Chalian, which is kind of like a Renaissance Italy with a bunch of different little duchies kind of thing. And I do realize I just mixed up duchies and Italy, which is like France. Moving on. It's a fantasy world, okay? And it's set in the realm of the five gods, same as Penric, but many years after, like a couple hundred years after Penric was alive. And Kaz was stewarded in this like noble house, raised as noble soldier kind of, and he ended up working for a couple of different campaigns for different powerful lords in Chalian. He got on the bad side of this one younger brother of de Journal, and while he was campaigning for the elder brother de Journal, he held a piece of land from, they were having a war with someone, I don't remember. He held it against siege until de Journal ransomed all the men, but conveniently didn't ransom Kaz, and Kaz was sold into the slave ships of the Rocknari, who are another, like, country. And so he served on these slave ships, was really badly treated, eventually escaped, and made his way back to the duchy where he had, like, grown up, seeking, like, employment, basically. A kind of wrecked and ruined man. Everyone thought he was dead, and everyone was really shocked that he was still alive. He's made the secretary slash accountant slash tutor of the Dowager Duchess's granddaughter, who is not exactly in line for the Chalian throne. Her younger brother is, but she's kind of like third in line since the current Lord of Chalian has no children. And this all sparks off just a ton of political stuff, political machinations and things. And in amongst this, we have Kaz, who is fundamentally a very good and noble and loyal man, despite being a little bit broken and weathered. And he is so loyal to the granddaughter he's put in charge of, and trying to like teach her and shape her and help her be a better Royina. I think Royina is the diminutive. And is trying to help her navigate these like political waters, and also like keep his own skin alive, because the elder and the younger DeJournals are very powerful men right now, and so it's like very dangerous for Kaz. And it is such a good book. Kazarel is quite possibly one of the best characters I have read in a while. I absolutely adored him, loved the plot. It is a true masterpiece. I understand why I've seen quite a few people in kind of the SFF community over the past 5 years pick up this book, which, I mean, it's 20 years old at this point, so it's kind of edging into being a classic now, I guess. But even though Louis McBatcher-Bujold is, still alive, still even writing in this universe, it is truly a gem. Highly suggest picking it up. Cannot recommend it enough, especially if you want some, like, political intrigue, fantasy stuff with a lot of heart, a lot of emotion, a lot about loyalty and being smart and being good, and trying to be all those things. And I love it. I love it so much. I'm also a big fan of it because it feels like a better written take on kind of a similar concept as like the Guild Wars 2 lore, but it's like so much better written. So yeah, I thought it was fantastic. So that was everything I read in February. Now I just want to touch on, I guess, my Tome Topple TBR, because, oh boy, I just really failed at Tome Topple this year. I really failed at Tome Topple this round, even though I was like so excited for round 10 Tome Topple. I know, to some extent it was because of the things I picked. So I did read Curse of Chalian, but it took me longer than Tome Topple to get through it. But I did get through it. The other thing on my TBR was The Historian. So I am reading The Historian. I started reading The Historian on maybe the second day of Tome Topple because I was finishing up another book. And I realized very quickly that I could force myself to read this in the month of February, but it would probably end up being the only thing I got read, because it's not something I can just sit down and read 50 pages of in a single sitting. I can't do that. It's really dense, it's a little monotonous, and it's just long. And I had a stack of library books that I was really excited for, and it just felt silly to do nothing but slog through this. So I read about 80 pages of this, and then I was like, you know what, I need a break. I'm going to go ahead and give myself permission to read another book, and then I will come back to this. So I read a book, I came back to this, I read like 30 or 40 pages, and then I was like, I'm going to go ahead and read another book. So that's what I've been doing. Basically, I read a book, then I read 40 or so pages of this, then I have permission to read another book, and I've just been going back and forth. I'm just over 200 pages into this, which means I'm like 30% of the way done. I'm going to keep reading this. I'm going to stick to my one book on 40 pages, one book, 40 pages. I'm going to stick to that, and in a couple of months I will have this finished. To be honest, that is as much as I can commit to. I'm not hating this. When I am in the midst of reading it, I find it interesting. Except that there are parts of it that are really boring. Like all the parts where it's just that it's about a narrator telling us a story that was told to her in her childhood, which in some places was another story being told to her father. So the parts where it's just her, and every time her father tells her another piece of the story, they like have to go on a trip, and then when they're on the trip, he tells her the piece of the story. So kind of like the bits where they're just like traveling, and it's just her reflecting on like the scenery. I'm not gonna lie, they're kind of boring, and it feels a bit like it's just like excessively pretentious. Like that's how it feels. Like maybe, I don't know if the author went to all these places and she's just like wanting to info dump that she's like these places she's been. It kind of feels like that, but I actually don't know if the author had ever been to any of these places or if she's just trying to give us that sense. But yeah, those pieces feel pretty pretentious. The story that's being told to the protagonist that the protagonist is now telling us, like the actual bits about like the research and like the kind of intrigue thrillery aspects with Dracula and like the Dracula myth, those pieces are more interesting. And so like when I'm in the midst of reading one of those, I am gripped. But then it inevitably goes back to a piece from the protagonist's childhood where she's just kind of traveling and on a train or sitting in a cafe, and I'm just kind of bored. They would probably come off better if they were just way shorter and also in a movie. But as it is, they're like 5 very intense pages in a book, and I'm just kind of like, can we get going? Like, does it need to be this excessively long? So anyways, I'm still reading this. I will finish it eventually. That's where I'm at. So obviously I didn't get anything else read for Tome Topple. No one is shocked. I hope you found this educating, enlightening. I hope you found some new books maybe to check out. See ya.